are EU citizenship rights and equal market objectives of equal importance? This is kind of the Laval question, and people have got very worried up about the possibility that in certain circumstances EU economic freedoms might restrict people's right to strike or other labour law rights. Of course, if you look at the treaties, they allow for the possibility that the latter, so EU social rights, can only be exercised in a proportionate way if they restrict market freedoms. So formally, of course, they're not treated equally. One is treated as an exception that has to be justified vis-a-vis another. That said, and I probably will get into trouble with some of my EU law friends and colleagues for saying this, I think the debate has been a little bit overblown. There haven't been huge numbers of cases since Laval where people can say, oh, their worker rights have been struck down by free movement of goods provisions or free movement of services provisions. Laval was a little bit unusual if you looked at, and I agree with some of the criticisms, but if you look at actually the reason why it was finally declared illegal, which was that the trade union would not stipulate what was the wage that needed to be paid. There are, well, you could say whether that was good or bad, but it's a particularly unusual sort of circumstances that isn't going to repeat itself too often. And I think if people were really worried about this, then, and we know this, that the real challenge to labour rights is not free movement of goods or free movement of services. It's that things can be produced outside the EU for companies like Primark for next to nothing, so companies will reinvest there. We have 0-hour contracts and things like that, and people say, well, it doesn't matter because we have an EU labour law. And those for me are the things I get worried about in terms of workers' rights, and that's nothing to do with Laval, in my view. You have to say that I think it's unfair just to call it a market citizenship because it's been drawn so broadly that it would not have generated the tensions with member states if they just saw it as about someone coming in and making lots of money for that state and for themselves. There are strong social dimensions, even to the economically active EU citizen. That said, it is an odd form of citizenship. It is only available to the mobile, and following Dano, to the economically active or the economically self-sufficient. Now, and even that's bizarre because many of the economically active don't have to be economically self-sufficient. So it's a skewed form of citizenship. I do not feel comfortable with saying it's market or not. I think if you had a blank piece of paper, you probably wouldn't draw it the way it does. It is, and there's many oddities about it. That said, one forgets it gives many entitlements and good things. I personally, my grandparents came over here as Czech refugees, so I would not be alive but for the UK. But I also see it a little bit from thinking my family have offered something to the UK as well. And with that personal perspective, I think the fact that EU citizenship has allowed so many people from the rest of the EU to come and live in the UK, this isn't a popular thing, it's been a wonderful thing. They don't just, we can argue forever about whether they enrich our economy, but for me much more important is they enrich our society. I don't know anyone, maybe this is a Londoner, that can't say that they don't have a friend or someone that they like from another part of the EU. And yeah, that's not a Eurocentric point of view. But I want, when Nigel Farage comes out with these things, I want to say to him, well, your wife's German, you had an affair with a Latvian, tell me that other EU citizens haven't benefited your life. And, and I accept that there can be tensions and issues about social entitlements, but that's a separate issue.
Sorry, just before we carry it, so you just said you'd followed Dano?
Dano is this recent case which limited the circumstances for right of residence and social entitlements. It was a Romanian woman who'd been living in Germany for 4 years without ever being economically active, so she didn't fall within the relevant part of the Citizenship Directive. And the question therefore was, did she have residence, which you needed after 3 months to claim the benefits that she wanted? And the Court of Justice said no. And it basically, by doing that, turning it around, said people who arrive in the EU, EU citizens in a non-member state, you get 3 months to do what you like, but then so do American citizens, basically. And then after that, you really can only stay and be a citizen and enjoy the social benefits or residence if you're economically active, so self-employed or have a job. It only has to be for about 12-15 hours, or economically self-sufficient. And that's of course a much more restricted sense of citizenship than many EU citizenship that many people have assumed.